Good day, my name is Keith Feely, that's my email address, that's the address they use in Twitter, which I use all the time. I'm going to speak to you today, one of a series of Keef Talks which I've based upon the TED Talk idea, where in 10 minutes or so I'm hoping to convey to you some key information that you may or may not have come across before, that I hope is going to have a big effect on your lives and anyone you come into contact with. Today I'm going to focus upon the 8 skills which you will see on the board here, and actually underpins everything that I'm going to speak to you about in each of these Keef Talks. It began for me 45 years ago when I began as a teacher in Romford, going back to my old school which I attended as a pupil prior to going on and getting a degree in chemistry. I went back there as a PE and a science teacher, but most importantly I wanted to try to help the vast numbers of vulnerable young people who were like me, struggling to come to terms with their young lives. So when I started to research this question up here: what do we most need to develop if we're going to have good health, well-being, and actually have decent chance of success in life? Not an easy question. I wonder if you've ever asked that of yourself, or more importantly perhaps of your children. Anyway, I'm going to just give you a brief outline of what I've discovered over the last 45 years, and I'm confident it's going to have a big impact on how you look at your life and everything from this day forward. You've only got to look at the news headlines and you will see there are vast numbers of activities, concerns throughout the world which perhaps worry you, and perhaps if you're a parent will worry you greatly even more because of your children being prone to these sorts of things. At the heart of all this are 8 key skills which causes them to be successful and be able to cope with the pressures they're placing these days in 21st century, but it's not easily learnt. So consequently, what I want to try to explain to you as a scientist, quite simply, when we're born we are of course all extremely vulnerable. If we're fortunate and have learning opportunities, then we can learn these 8 skills which you'll see over here, which I'll go into more detail in a moment, and be able to resist and overcome the difficulties and the pressures which life throws upon us. The first one is the most crucial of all, because we are born that vulnerable, but we are fortunate enough to have the ability to learn. Crucially, it has to be enhanced and developed from a very early age. In fact, we now know in the womb we're already learning at a tremendous rate of knots. But what we have to make sure is from a very young age we learn to concentrate, so we can focus upon things which are going to help us learn, and actually be very quickly help us become independent of everything and everyone around us, because otherwise we're not actually going to be able to survive. And you will spot this in young learners, because gradually, bit by bit, if they're fortunate enough to undergo this, they will be able to learn pretty quickly without the need for other people to be directly affecting them. The thing that we're fortunate in, and that the learning has allowed us to communicate probably better than any other species. It's important that people understand that when young babies are born, they are picking up a lot of information, usually non-verbal information because they haven't understood language, but they are able to focus upon what really matters and actually pick up those sorts of things bit by bit. Consequently, within a relatively short period of time, perhaps within a couple of years, they're able to start speaking and communicating back to us. But most importantly, as you will probably see from the use of my hands, facial expressions and so forth, much more is communicated with our body and those sorts of things than we might anticipate. And we need to understand that that is an early form of communication which we should never neglect. When we talk about intelligence, historically, perhaps in the 19th century, we would be talking in terms of cognitive intelligence. This is the ability to understand things and be able to solve problems and make very good decisions. This is an important part of our development because the earlier we become independent and able to cope, the earlier we're able to make good decisions and not put us into danger. But unfortunately, if we're not careful, if we're not given the opportunity to learn these skills, then we become very vulnerable and make a lot of very bad decisions. And perhaps we've seen a lot of that in recent times. So consequently, one of the things that I would emphasize to people is that when we learn to improve, we need to be able to look at ourselves very accurately and be able to assess ourselves very accurately so that we know how we're feeling, what we're thinking, and to understand how we can improve our weaknesses and make good use of our strengths. This is not something we're born with. Any of these are not something we're born with, but we gradually, with help and support, be able to reflect upon our lives. The old diaries used to do this, and begun to identify what we really need to make important use of ourselves. In recent times, self-esteem has been particularly become vulnerable because with the access to so much from around the world, we become prone to making assessments upon things which really aren't going to be particularly important to us, but they appear to us because they're bombarding us on a daily, minute-by-minute basis. That's why what we need to be aware of is that when we are trying to cope with that sort of information, we need to be able to manage our emotions, manage ourselves very effectively. This is now often called self-regulation. It can be called self-discipline or self-control. It's the classic example which Oscar Wilde used when he was saying about I can resist anything but temptation. The problem for us is that when we are very young, when we're babies, we aren't able to resist temptation. It's only a question of learning over a period of time which allows us to gradually develop the ability, the skill, to be able to look at those things and resist and delay gratification. If we aren't able to do that, then we become very, very prone to all the things around us. And of course, in the 21st century, that is very diverse and very wide-ranging, and hence we see a huge amount of mental health problems, depression, drug problems, etc. Which brings us nicely on to the next one, because one of the things which I became interested in many years ago, using a science term, resilience, is the ability to be able to look at things and be able to cope with that and not let it destroy us. But in recent times, the term growth mindset has been applied, which tends to look at how we can review what's occurred in our lives and others' lives and actually make that perhaps a positive thing, so we're learning from it. This is not something we're born with, and in fact it's something which is still too rare in too many people. But the ability to be resilient and to have a positive growth mindset makes a huge difference and keeps us motivated and stops us perhaps plummeting down the hole of deep depression and problem. The last two are areas which in Howard Gardner's terms are interpersonal skills. This is where we're dealing with other people. And the ability to see inside people's heads, empathy, is something which should not be underestimated. We are creatures which depend upon other people, and being able to understand how they think and feel is crucial. This has become very difficult in recent times because once upon a time we were in a little family, in a little village, in a small conurbation where everybody tended to think and feel much the same. Now it's a global community that we're dealing with, huge diversity, backgrounds from all sorts of religions and cultures, and therefore trying to empathise with how they think and feel has become incredibly difficult in recent times and confuses so many people. Finally, if we are to appreciate that we are a social species, our strength comes from interacting with others, it's also a huge dependency for us, because when we become isolated, we know we're struggling. I'm fortunate enough to come from a background where sport has dominated my life, and I learned from a very young age that being able to function well within a team is absolutely vital if we're to be successful. I was also fortunate enough to realise that leading those teams is something which is not easy for a lot of people, and the skills that we have to be able to make those decisions and enhance what we have around us is something which makes a big difference to our lives. Consequently, those skills that we're dealing with will make a huge difference to that. That's why what we have here is not only the skills which are going to cause us to be healthy and effective, it will also, if you develop all 8 of those skills very well, cause you to become an effective leader in all sorts of different areas. I hope that brief introduction has whetted your appetite and encourages you to go on and see some more Keef Talks. Thank you very much. Good day to you.